the recently announced and presented budget fiscal package for 2025-2026 with specific reference and relevance to Tobago and Tobago's allocation. And like you, most Tobagoans who would have heard the announcement, Tobago receiving 5% of the budgetary allocation, which equates to about $2.96 billion, and a further transfer of spending from the central government in the amount of about $776 million. We all felt elated. Some of us felt euphoric, and some of us felt that this was indeed unprecedented and welcome. While I sat there and I heard what was being delivered and presented, I, too, as a Tobagonian, felt quite happy. But you know, I would have shared my initial reaction with, as part of the opposition leaders' press conference. And very early, I pointed out what Tobago would have lost when you compare that 5% allocation to the 6.8% that was guaranteed in the Tobago Island government bill. I further on reflection after coming from Trinidad did indicate to you, fellow Tobagonians, that I will do a more detailed review of the budget, and I will get back to you and share with you some of the findings, because as I suspected at that time, the devil is really in the details. And so suggested, so it is. When you look at the details of this budget, what you would see, what looks like on the surface as something very well packaged, something that is giving a lot to Tobago. When you scratch the surface and you get to the meat of it, what you recognize, as properly coined by former Prime Minister Stuart Young, it is smoke and mirrors. It is well seasoned with deceit, deception, and in some respects, dishonesty. And you know, the first area I want to start with is I want us to treat with the headline announcement that has been going across all media houses. And as the Tobago allocation is in fact $3.7 billion, which sounds really close to the $3.9 billion that they asked for, and it indeed represents 6.3% of the budget. And while that might be so in theory, what is the reality? The reality is that the THA, which is the funding we all usually depend on to run the day-to-day affairs of Tobago, received only 5%. And yes, we welcome 5% because it is an increase on what we received in previous years. As a matter of fact, 5%, by my recollection, is but the highest percentage Tobago would have received in its historical context of getting allocations from Trinidad. So we welcome 5%. Every cent more to Tobago is welcome. But you would recognize, even in Tobago receiving 5%, usually you would get a disaggregation of what that 5% represents. And what that means in simple terms, they usually would break down and tell you what of that 5%, of that 2.96 billion, and I want to talk in dollars and cents more than percentage, of that $2.96 billion, that is further broken down in terms of recurrent expenditure. And recurrent expenditure are the day-to-day functions, things like salaries, gratuities, increments, purchasing of minor equipments, purchasing of stationery, the things you need to keep the THA going on a daily basis. That is your recurrent expenditure. And the thing about the recurrent expenditure is that while it treats with putting money in the ordinary Tobagonian's pocket, it is the development expenditure that really treats with the growth of Tobago's economy and the development of Tobago's economy. And therefore, so you have your recurrent expenditure, you have your development expenditure, you also have an allocation that goes specifically for URP and an allocation that comes specifically for CPEP. None of that was placed in this year's summary of what Tobago received. The central government didn't tell us, and curiously, the THA did not tell us. But I want to step back very quickly to explain to you and differentiate the THA allocation from the government spend. Because while the THA allocation is predictable, there's no proper accounting as to verify and as to check and ensure that what the government says they're going to spend is actually spent. If you look at this budget, there was no confirmation as to how much money was actually spent in Tobago. So therefore, whatever the government says they are going to spend does not really or should or not really be commingled with the Tobago allocation. And that is important. So putting the figures together is really dishonest, it is disingenuous, and it is an injustice to how that will impact the average Tobagonian. So the funding and the allocation that we usually consider when you consider Tobago's allocation is that THA allocation of between 4.03% to 6.9%. The other aspect of that, so I just want to share with you where the first line of dishonesty, deceit, and deception lies. So we have heard that Tobago received a whopping 5%, and we all welcome it, we all clapped. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But at the same time, what they did not tell you all, as I said, the devil is in the details. So on the recurrent side, Tobago received, and I just want to share with you some details. So while on the recurrent side, in this current arrangement, Tobago received about, well, Tobago requested, let me just share what we requested. We requested $3.71 billion. That is what was requested. We then, and that was broken down, $2.71 billion for recurrent, that is the day-to-day runnings of Tobago, $1 billion for development, that is to pave your roads, which is in a terrible state, that is to do your retaining walls, that is to ensure that we can invest in tourism and all agriculture, etc. $1 billion. For URP, we requested $91.9 million. And for CPEP, we requested $43.4 million. What Tobago actually received based on the budgetary allocation is we received $2.7 billion in recurrent, but here the gist. We received only $201 million in development. And what is interesting about that is while our recurrent expenditure increased phenomenally by $400 million, our development allocation actually decreased, meaning Tobago actually received less money for the development of the island, that is to pave your roads, do your bridges. So whereas we got $205 million in development last year under the PNM, under this UNC, they saw it fit that Tobago is only deserving of $201.5 million, which is an actual reduction of $4.5 million. And you would have heard the cries and complaints of this current administration year in, year out, because development moved from $300 million in 2021. Then it came down to, in 2022. Then in 2023, it came down to $260 million. And then last year, it came down to $205 million. And under the UNC that says they love Tobago and want to see Tobago develop, we have actually received a decrease in that allocation to $201.5 million. And you did not, what is curious about this, we did not hear one word from the Secretary of Finance, not one word from the Chief Secretary. And these are the people who would have described these allocations in the past as fiscal wickedness, because you would hear from economists such as Vanus James that it is the development side of Tobago that really needs a buffer, because Tobago's development has been lagging for years behind that of the country. And therefore, to get Tobago up to speed, the area that really needs a kickstart is on the development side. So if you, in a real sense, if any increase was to happen as a minority leader and a Tobagonian, I would have expected and hoped that it would have been the development side that would have gotten that increase so as to move Tobago's development forward. So deception number one, in the details where they are saying that Tobago received a phenomenal increase overall, but we are seeing specific to the development allocation, which is but the most important side to really grow Tobago's economy. We have in fact received a decrease in the allocation. Point number two, in terms of point number two, and going again on the recurrent versus the development allocation. So yes, the overall figure looks higher, but the money to actually build Tobago, to fund housing, roads, schools, and major projects has gone down. And it begs a question for many of us who have been following this story about Scarborough Sec. You will recall a sign was placed and shovel, they went there, big fanfare, put up a sign that Scarborough Sec will be built, commissioned, etc. at Bacolet. That sign remains. But I have perused the length and breadth of the document, and I am asking the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Education to tell us where in that document the funding for the construction of Scarborough Secondary is going to come from. Because clearly a school that is estimated to be about $300 million, it is not located in the development allocation, because our development allocation is but only $201.5 million. So where is the funding for Scarborough Sec? Will Scarborough Sec be constructed going forward? Thirdly, and curiously, as I mentioned, you will recall they asked for $91.9 million for URP and $43.4 million for CPEP. Again, I have looked both on the recurrent side, the development side, funding to statutory bodies, and I have not seen any allocation specific to URP and to CPEP. And perhaps I'm asking out loud, could this be the reason why the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Finance deliberately, dishonestly, deceptively, deceivingly failed to indicate what is Tobago's allocation for CPEP and URP? And more importantly, and I want to address the URP workers, the CPEP workers, and let you understand what that means for you. Because in Trinidad, we have seen, and it is properly articulated in the budget, that the government is moving away from CPEP and the URP. And therefore, we have to ask ourselves, you the CPEP worker, you the URP worker, whether having no allocation from the central government is now in fact an indication that there is some future decision to shut down URP and shut down CPEP. We all are aware that we are in an election period. So obviously, you would hear a lot of the Chief Secretary will try to basically assure you. So you will get some assurances that, no, we are not shutting down CPEP, but the proof is in the eating. When he tells you that, you need to ask him where in the budget is the allocation for CPEP? Where in the budget is the allocation for URP? And is it in fact that at some point in time, these programs will be shut down in Tobago as they have been shut down in Trinidad? And what does that mean for the hundreds of Tobagonians who depend on a salary from URP and depend on a salary from CPEP? Fellow Tobagonians, as we go through the details, because as I said, the devil is in the details. So 5%, yay, plenty money for Tobago. But we have to look at what this really means, because it's one thing getting the money. So you get in the past, because if you look at the previous allocations year on year, Tobago received an increase, whether it is PNM or UNC. For example, in 2022, the overall allocation was $2.5 billion. In 2023, that allocation increased by $100 million to $2.6 billion. And further, in 2024, there was another slight adjustment of about $2.61 billion. So every year along the way, Tobago has in fact received an increase in allocation. But we have to also tie that in to how has that allocation redound to the benefit of the people of Tobago. When you add all the allocations, this administration would have received historically the highest amount of allocation for any administration in the history of the Tobago House of Assembly for any one term. They have now received over $11 billion. And we have been saying to you Tobagonians that while the money is always important and we'll always clamor for more and we'll always welcome more, what is even more important is how those funds are managed. And I want to share with you by way of two examples whether the funding that is received is to the benefit of Tobago. And you will recall we talked about the roads. For example, in one fiscal year, when we received $300 million in development funding, do you know that entire development funding went right back to contractors in Trinidad, where the THA went on a road paving construction spree? And instead of using Tobago-based contractors who were tried and tested, who employ Tobagonians, who take their materials from Tobago hardwares, this wicked THA, this uncaring THA, this TPP THA that is unpatriotic to Tobago, found 4 contractors from Trinidad and gave that entire $300 million in development to contractors from outside Tobago. And therefore, I place this increase in that very context, that it matters not whether we get more, but ultimately, we have to ensure that that funding is managed in a way that benefits the average Tobagonian. And based on the record of this administration, one has to wonder whether with even increasing allocation, whether those fundings will be managed to the benefit of the average Tobagonian. Because I will ask again out loud, after $11 billion being spent, do you think we in Tobago should be driving on roads where almost every meter you have to dodge a pothole? Sometimes it is so big, it is so bad that it is like a crater. You actually feel your tires coming off and going on back after you come out of the pothole. Such is the state of our roads. When you look at just the manicure and the way how we keep the landscaping of Tobago, Tobago was once clean, green, safe, and serene. Now Tobago is overrun by bush. I tried to drive to Pallitive the other day, and the roads are getting narrower and narrower because the roads are being overtaken with bush. So I hope they would have done some cutting and landscaping, because we look forward to going up there for Blue Food this weekend. But I'm saying to you, Tobagonians, all the young fellas who are coming to me complaining, with $11 billion being spent among 60,000 people, that is, every Tobagonian should have felt like they have received at least $250,000 in their pocket. That is the mathematics. But you have a number of Tobagonians still unemployed. A number of Tobagonians can't get simple grants to fix their homes, to buy basic items such as food. I have called for the THA to consider something called a universal back-to-school grant, so that we can ensure that our families can go back to school and our children go back to school without the worry of not having books, not having school supplies and stationery and the proper uniform. So it is one thing to get increase, but the question we have to ask is, how is that increase impacting on you, the average Tobagonian? And I also want to debunk again one of the headlines that went across, that this $3.7 billion is the highest percentage cumulative increase that Tobago has ever received in the history of the THA. And I want to share with you some data as to remind people. So whereas $3.7 billion, because you have a higher allocation, is the highest numerical allocation ever received in totality, the percentage 6.3% is not. In 2018, under the PNM, the THA received an allocation, overall allocation of over $2.5 billion. And they also received in government transfers an additional $1.09 billion. And percentage-wise, put together, that represented in 2018 6.49%. Therefore, it is incorrect, it is dishonest, it is deceitful, and it is disingenuous for both the UNC and the TPP to be going around and saying that this 6.3% is but the highest. And while we are talking percentage, we must appreciate that this 5% is no gift to Tobagonians. And why do I say this? This 5% is no gift to Tobagonians because it was the UNC, aided and abetted by Chief Secretary Augustine, who colluded to derail and to destroy the Tobago Island government bills that went to the parliament. And you will recall the one that had within it the 6.8% was passed by simple majority, but it was a constitutional amendment bill, the one to give that 6.8% life, that the UNC shut down and could not go forward. And that is what basically took away from Tobago the opportunity to get guaranteed 6.8%. And I want to put that in context, because while we received $2.9 billion, which represents 5%, had those bills been passed and approved under the agreement of the UNC and the Chief Secretary, Tobago would have received $4 billion as its allocation. And what that means, so while they are saying Tobago won by getting an additional $400 million over the period 2024 as compared to now, Tobago, in a real sense, based on that 6.8% guaranteed allocation for Tobago, where we would have gotten $4 billion guaranteed, Tobago actually lost in additional revenue and allocation $1 billion. And if we are to take it even further back to the time that that bill came to Parliament and the number of budgets that would have gone since 2021, had we agreed and passed that law, those bills that guaranteed Tobago 6.8%, Tobago would have received in totality an additional $7.8 billion. So in a real sense, based on the Chief Secretary's actions by not supporting the Tobago Island government bill, over his 4-year term, Tobago have lost $7.8 billion, which means for you, the average Tobagonian, more money for development of roads, bridges, homes, you public servants who are clamoring for homes, etc. You Tobagonian that want to go out and study all those fancy degrees, more money for financial assistance. You the parent, the single parent who needs support to mind your children, more money for in support for necessitous families, etc. So in an essence, in this current budget, if you compare what was guaranteed, the 6.8%, as opposed to what was received by begging, the 5%, Tobago actually lost $1 billion. And finally, we have to look at some of the measures overall and how it impacts Tobago. Because while we focus on the allocation, the government did have some measures inside of there. And you have to ask yourself, how will that impact Tobago, especially Tobago's tourism? And one such measure is the measure of the property tax, which the Minister of Finance cunningly coined landlord tax. But it is property tax. And this tax, as you know, most Tobagonians are into either Airbnb, so you would do short-term lease of your property. Some of us would do long-term lease of our property. And most of our property, we may add on a 2-bedroom here. And in fact, Castara have built out a strong community-based tourism model based on having that kind of arrangement where they use their property as accommodation for backpackers. And therefore, you know, the average Tobagonian who was earning a little income, a little extra income after you invest your little savings and put on a 2-room downstairs, this government is now calling on you to pay this property tax that is based on the current arrangement is even higher than the property tax to which they repealed. And if that is not deceitful, if that is not deceptive, and if that is not dishonest, I do not know what is. And then you look at, we are Harvest Society. almost every Sunday there's a harvest in Tobago. And we know the people in the East, there's a big competition as to who have long sauce and who are no sauce and who are the most alcohol. And then you have almost a 100% increase on alcohol. So what does that mean for our harvest culture? This is an attack on the culture of Tobago. I'm not saying that we are drunkards, but we are people who like to enjoy ourselves. Harvest being one of the things that even the Division of Tourism is pushing in a big way, harvest tourism. And therefore, this is going to put a pressure on the ordinary Tobagonian to do this thing that we all love, we all enjoy, entertaining and hosting. We call it Thanksgiving. And this government has attacked our way of giving thanks by putting this tax on the average citizen. This increase in alcohol, it means now many families who usually would enjoy harvest and who would usually use this as an opportunity to give thanks will not be able to so do. So in one breath, while there are things in there seem like it is for the poor man, in another breath, the things that make the poor man happy, comfortable, and even stress-free, the government is actually attacking it. And we all are looking on with bated breath. I expected and I would have hoped, after you have been in government for now 6 months, and this A&R Robinson Airport, that the government would have been able to give us a clear date that when this airport would be open. But it appears to me that the government does not have the political will nor the capacity to treat with commissioning this A&R airport with some level of definity. So while we are given the second fiscal period of next year, which is somewhere perhaps about March, hopefully before Easter, we are still waiting on a defined date as to when will this A&R airport terminal be opened. And as I wrap up, I just want to reiterate the key takeaways of this conversation. And the final point is my concern as a citizen with respect to where our revenue coming from oil and gas is pegged. The $73 per barrel, all experts, based on what I've seen across the board, is saying that that is an unrealistic figure. And even when you look at gas at $4.5 per MMBTU, that also appears to be unrealistic. And therefore, the question has to ask as well, if you are pegging your budget on unrealistic figures, can you in fact realistically deliver on the 5% allocation for the people of Tobago? And we are looking closely because the Secretary of Finance admitted that even after describing the former PNM administrations as wicked and deliberately trying to stifle Tobago's growth and development, that they still continue to get their allocation not in keeping with the law and in most times late. And therefore, if at this point they are struggling to meet their obligations of less funding, I am concerned as to whether this current government can in fact deliver those allocations to Tobago on time and in keeping with the law. Because it is one thing to announce an allocation, but it is a whole different thing to deliver on it. So I'm saying to Tobagonians, let us stay vigilant. As I said, the devil is in fact in the details, and it is for this reason why everything has been glossed over, and the Chief Secretary must now tell us how he feels in a real way about receiving less allocation for development when in previous years he described that as wicked, he described that as trying to stifle and stymie his administration's ability to deliver those development deliverables important to you, such as your roads and your bridges. He spent the last general election campaign comparing Tobago's development allocation to the projects, the PSIP projects in Trinidad, and therefore I am very confused as to, in a situation where we received actual less in development, the Chief Secretary is saying to you Tobagonians that he got a sweetheart deal. If that is a sweetheart deal, I don't even want to see the deal that is coming from the devil. So at this point in time, I will take questions from the media on these matters specific to the budget. There is one matter before we take questions I also want to raise, which is the issue of CAL and the flights for the Tobago Carnival. The Promoters Association, the Band Association, Band Leaders Association, they have all called on me to call on Caribbean Airlines to put on additional flights, because even now there are situations where artists cannot get flights, and those are performers. There are people who have paid for their costumes cannot get flights. There are people who have purchased tickets to the various activities that cannot get flights. And the Hotel Association is also saying there are people with bookings that also cannot get flights. And they are saying to them, if they cannot get confirmed flights within a reasonable time, they will be forced to cancel. And this will definitely adversely affect the Tobago Carnival. And I remember again, is it now that CAL is no longer being weaponized by the government? Because that was the accusations being leveled at CAL in the past. And now where we have a situation where CAL cannot meet the demand, all we are getting from this current administration is nothing but silence. It's crickets, their lips are zipped, and they have abdicated their responsibility to speak on behalf of you, the people of Tobago. So I'm raising this with Caribbean Airlines, that even if it means putting 2 jets on from Thursday, Friday to Saturday, Sunday and Monday, we are calling on you to please help the people of Tobago who have already invested. Please help our brothers and sisters in Trinidad who want to come and enjoy the festival, and those abroad who need to be connected from Trinidad to Tobago by adding some more flights. So I'll take questions on any matter, including the CAL matter, from you, the members of the media. So I wouldn't couch it as wrong, but what I think is that we need honest conversations, right? And the point is, they sold us the impression that, Tobago got this 5% increase. But what does it really mean for the average Tobagonian? Does it mean that we can now get a relief with respect to our roads? Does it mean that we are now going to be able to get faster access to grants for the hundreds of persons who were called and given in a lottery, given spots for homes? By now, we were told by the Secretary of Housing that they would have delivered on an annual basis 200 homes. We are in their 40th year of their term, and based on my assessment, I do not recall them building any new homes. So what does this really mean? And therefore, I think an honest caring Tobago House of Assembly would, and this is what we would have done as the PNM, we would have leveled with Tobagonians, let them know actually what we got, and then we come back, because that is the precedent the PNM always set. We would have told you what we got in recurrent, what we got in development, what we got for CPEP, what we got for URP. But what we would have done is go back to the table, and then we would see how we can suppress some areas in recurrent to help to fund the additional things that we need to do in development. Because it cannot be that while you are receiving more to hire people, etc., that you have the day-to-day irritants being left done, like having to drive on bad roads. This is unprecedented in Tobago. You might have a pothole here and there, but now it seems that potholes are everywhere. And therefore, you know, that is one of the areas that I'm very concerned about. It's not to say that there's something wrong, because we know a budget is about balancing, just like a home, income and expenditure. But it is about what do you now prioritize to ensure, one, that what you receive is being spent in a way that is beneficial to the people of Tobago. For example, why is it in Tobago we are bringing contractors from outside of Tobago to build a preschool for $7 million? Are you saying to me that there's no contractor in Speyside, in Wim, in Delaford, in Canaan, who could put up some bricks and mortar and a roof and some doors and some windows for $7 million? And aren't we deserving of spending that money? Why are we, in one hand, receiving from the central government and then finding a way to let that money leak out and go back outside of Tobago to people who are already benefiting from billions of dollars in Trinidad? I think that is unacceptable, to the point where our contractors are now facing foreclosure across the board. And they too now, who used to employ a lot of Tobagonians, had to fire these workers, terminate these workers, and a lot of young fellas are just home idle, hopeless. And I think that is one of the areas the PNM will treat with definitively and decisively once we get the opportunity to manage that 5%, that $2.9 billion. Our focus will be ensuring that we put Tobago first, our young people, give them sustainable, permanent jobs, treat with tourism by investing in our sites and our attractions, developing sites. When last have we developed a site in Tobago? I'm seeing in St. Luke's, St. Kitts, where they are doing right on the foreshore of a beach. It's like basically an area for wedding tourism, for romance. So you can come there for honeymoons. You could come there to renew your vows. And you have it overlooking the ocean. Where are those kind of unique... This secretary has flown the most. It is the most traveled secretary in the history of Tobago. And I'm wondering, when you go to these countries and these islands and you are seeing what they are doing, doesn't it ring a little, give you a little click that perhaps we can do this or something like this here in Tobago? What have she brought back to the table after 4 years, $25 million in overseas travel? What has this secretary brought back that we can look and say we have seen a difference in terms of what Tobago is offering to the world outside of our natural beauty, sand, sea, the Buku Reef, and the Nylon Pool? What has she offered?
Caribbean Airlines and going another flight for the Carnival period. Is that sufficient, do you think? No?
Well, quite interestingly, I was told no new flights have been added, and this came from the management of Caribbean Airlines. So perhaps you may have more information than me, because based on my inquiries, inquiring on behalf of the Promoters Association, band leaders, inquiring that it is my understanding that more flights will be added. And I was told, based on official correspondence, that no new flights will be added. And therefore, I'm calling on the Chief Secretary, if he requires us to go down to meet with Cal on this matter. This is a serious matter. Let us go down together and get Cal to act on behalf of the people of Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, and this product that we are trying to develop, which is the Tobago Carnival. There's an appetite for the carnival. People want to come, but we have to find a way to get them here. I mean, I also am quite disappointed in this Tobago House of Assembly because we've been doing this now for 3 years. And you are telling me we cannot find a unique way as to how to move and house people? We could have leased a cruise ship, create packages, and that would have taken off some of the pressure from Cal and from the seaport. We could have even leased, there was a time Tobago used to lease planes. We could have leased planes specifically for this period. You could have even put it at an inflated rate because the law allows for that. We could have those leased planes. We could have created packages and you sell it like that so they would not even recognize what they were paying for the flights because you were putting, whether it's THA events, fringe events, and everything into one package, lease the planes and have people come. The THA has been sitting like a lame duck for the last 3 years doing absolutely nothing to treat with the challenges of airlift. They have not added any new airlift in the international space, which is again a challenge. Because if you have direct flights coming out of Miami, direct flights out of New York, etc., it means those people don't have to come to Port of Spain to compete with the persons already trying to get from Trinidad to Tobago. But what we have not added any new flights across the board. In fact, we have lost flights. We have lost the Virgin flight. And if you had the relationships where you had these players in the space, you could have had the conversation. But yet this administration has been the most traveled administration. So what are they doing with our monies when we send them out to go and market and represent Tobago? Are they having the kind of negotiations, skillful negotiations with proper plans and proposals that everybody could see a win for them? Because ultimately, people might like Tobago, but people like the business more. And therefore, whatever you leverage to people must be leveraged in the context that it will be a win for you and a win for me.
I haven't heard you talk about this ferry. So is it that you don't have a problem with that service, or is it that you haven't got any complaints coming from that service?
Well, the point about it, there are people, not everybody likes traveling with the ferry. There are some people who will tell you, for one reason or the other, they can't, basically, they're seasick. They can't travel with the ferry. Some people just prefer not to travel with it. It's too long. And some people just prefer to get on a plane and get off. And therefore, you know, we, at the end of the day, we want people to come. And therefore, it is on us to ensure we provide access to the destination, whether it be by sea or by air. And what is happening at this time, and what is curious, is the fact that this THA that had a lot to say in the past is saying absolutely nothing. So is it that they have sold Tobago for 30 pieces of silver? And just to ensure that they get sufficient song bites that sound good, look good on the surface, that would carry them into an election, and then we get the real bite of CPEP being shut down, URP being shut down, continued challenges with Cal, all our money is being spirited away to their financing friends in Trinidad, and all of that while we in Tobago suffer? Is this the Judas effect?
Because this property tax really covers everybody who owns a house versus the landlord, quote-unquote landlord tax, which only targets persons going into their houses for rental properties. What do you have to say to those who are saying that this is simply a sour green reaction?
Well, I would say in the first instance, we always supported persons who own homeowners contributing some kind of tax to the upkeep of your surroundings, your environment, by way of garbage, etc. And the way it was presented was to ensure that those local authorities, whether it be your municipalities or the THA, have adequate funding to treat with the day-to-day operations within your space, your community. And therefore, we had absolutely, and we have absolutely no challenge with that. What we have a challenge with is the hypocrisy, because it was this UNC who campaigned Axe the Tax and gave everybody, because you remember the mantra was, when UNC wins, everybody wins. So it mattered not whether you were a homeowner, whether you were a landlord, etc. The impression you would have gotten from the UNC is that this tax is unreasonable. They said it was wicked, it was heartless, and that you will not be taxed. However, a few moments later, we are hearing this tax coming to landlords, which we know will be passed on to the average man who rents. And in Tobago, because we have this culture where most of us go to college, and when we return, we feel we are a big man and big woman now, so we love to go out. We move from mommy's home to renting our own space because we are get accustomed living on our own. And therefore, you, the average Tobagonian who currently rents, will recognize your salary will be impacted because your rent will increase, because your landlord will now pass on that tax to your rent. And you, the person who have to come to Ireland to enjoy Tobago, you will also see increases in accommodation prices, because the Airbnbs, the villas, etc., they too will now increase their rates. And perhaps that will even affect the competitiveness of Tobago's tourism product. Because whereas now perhaps I would rent my property average for $600, because you are now having to pay a tax, you may have to increase that to $700. And when the person do the assessment and compare what I'm paying in Tobago as opposed to Grenada, etc., they may choose to go Grenada. So this has far-reaching impact, and that's why I say it is hypocrisy at its highest, and it's dishonesty as well, because you can't fight down something and then repackage it and bring it back with a different name.
In terms of this alcohol tax, what would be your comment in terms of this being set to be able to boost the local alcohol industry? For instance, local winemaking, because people would not be able to afford as well as they used to buy the alcohol that would be on the sales shelves. So what would you have to say about that? Because it may very well be something that could boost local winemaking right here in Tobago.
Well, the point is, we have had increases on alcohol over the period historically, and perhaps you might be able to tell me better than most. Has that boosted or affected how people consume alcohol and beer and etc.? It doesn't. Therefore, this is just simply, as I said, it will affect the cultural experiences and expressions of our people. It will also affect all our events going forward and our festivals, especially Carnival. Carnival is a period of high alcohol consumption, sale, and even events. And what you would see right away for those people who go to a lot of events is that automatically, those especially who include alcohol in their pricing, those all-inclusive or drink-inclusive, etc., those prices will increase. And what you are doing is pricing the ordinary man from enjoying our festivals and our activities. And in the context of Tobago, you are pricing the ordinary man from participating in one of our major festivals, which is Harvest. Because if the price of alcohol increases, which is one of the main aspects, is food and drinks. We all know how Harvest goes. And for the average man in Roxborough, Speyside, Charlottesville, Lansome, who now have to pay almost double for a case of Carib, double for a bottle of White Oak, it means either you cannot afford to do it at all, or you may have to do it in in a less lavish way. And Tobagonians like to go out. It's either you're doing it good or you're not doing it at all. And therefore, this will impact harvest as well.
You've spoken about tourism quite extensively in the last few months. But as it pertains to this budget, do you think that there is a proper direction for tourism plan or something to prop up the tourism sector in that budget?
There's actually no direction. The minister made a passing comment about Marriott and about Elephant Tree. And mind you, all those two projects are projects that were facilitated under the People's National Movement, both at the central government level and the Tobago House of Assembly. Those two projects. But what about Sandals? You would recall we all met with the principals of Sandals recently, just before the elections. That was sometime in April, early April. And there was a commitment from Sandals to give us a decision as to whether they will in fact reconsider their withdrawal from Tobago as a prospective destination. As of now, we are seeing Sandals have made major announcements in developments in the Caribbean going forward. And unfortunately, there will be some detractors might see that as a good thing. But for me as a Tobagonian who have seen what Sandals have done for St. Vincent and the rest of the Caribbean, disappointedly, Tobago has not been included in Sandals' immediate plans. And therefore, the question we all have to ask ourselves is whether they would have communicated, whether there's any official communication from Sandals as to the decision on Tobago, and it's for the Chief Secretary and the current Minister of Tourism to perhaps respond to that in the budget. But I am curious because we have not heard anything official other than Sandals have announced that in St. Vincent, who quite interestingly benefited from that Sandals project that we refused and rejected, and I say we, the Chief Secretary and his followers, along with the UNC, refused and rejected. St. Vincent was able to welcome Sandals, and now they are getting additional investment in beaches. And therefore, I saw that as a loss. And with respect to other announcements, there was nothing unique. There's no incentivization measures put in place. Can we not make Tobago a duty-free zone or some part of Tobago? Nothing like that was said. Did the Chief Secretary put that as a proposal? This assembly is clueless. This assembly is simply spending money. They are behaving like pipers. That is all they are doing. Spending, 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 and they are not putting nothing in place to earn. What revenue generating measures have this assembly put in place? We have a gold mine. That is Studley Park Quarry. Under Kelvin Charles, the mechanisms were put in place to ensure that Studley Park Quarry becomes a net revenue earner for the people of Tobago by transforming it from a public enterprise to a public-private run enterprise as a limited liability company. Yet the THA under this current Chief Secretary has mismanaged Studley Park Quarry to the point that we have moved from a period where persons were able to get crush run and get their bowlers very easily to truckers saying to you they have to spend nights on nights again to get something as simple as bowlers. And if you're not able to get the input, which is a mineral, available to those who want to buy, then you are in fact running the quarry at a loss. And that is what is happening. There has been no serious revenue generation. Everything the Chief Secretary mentioned with respect to revenue generation has fallen flat. You will recall this whole push for alternative flowers. Where are we on that? Tatco would have gone to Grenada, spent a lot of money traveling. Have you seen any serious export of alternative flowers? Where are we on the whole issue of a zip line? The Chief Secretary was the one who prosecuted that matter, and that you would have thought would have been an easy piece of tourism adventure product to add to Tobago since there were already infrastructure in place. And after 4 years, Not even a zip line the chief secretary could put in his own constituency. So they have failed. In agriculture, they talk about the mega farms. I'm driving around Tobago and I'm yet to see a mega farm. So I just want you to be honest, Tobagonians. And yes, some of you all may have an issue with what I have to say, but check the facts. Where are the delivery on revenue generating mechanism and measures and policies for Tobago? When you listen to the THA budget and when you hear them talk about what they have earned, and they simply earn from taxation, but what they have actually earned as revenue as the THA, it is zero. But they spend over 2.9 or 2.5 or so billion dollars every year. And that is in that context, I said, they are behaving as pipers, because if you are only spending what you have, but not earning to put back, then you are in fact running yourself into bankruptcy. Well, you have touched on an important issue there, which is basically the projections for revenue. And as I said, if you peg your revenue on unrealistic assumptions, then you will have unrealistic outcomes. And we must also appreciate that anything supplemental is an addition to the deficit, which means you have to find some way to finance that, which also would mean you have to borrow more. Currently, we have borrowing challenges because you would have seen that our across the board, based on Standard & Poor's, etc., and Moody's, we have been downgraded. Means that to get financing, you would have to pay higher interest, and that is an additional cost as well. We also in Trinidad and Tobago have the issue of gas supply. So it's not simply the price, but it is also production. We are not producing at the rates we were producing before. So it means in terms of volumes, you won't, even if the price was up there, because you are not supplying at the amount, you will in fact get less revenue just based on what you have available to supply. So you have two challenges: the price challenge, which is unrealistic, and the production challenge, which we know we have current gas challenges in terms of our own ability to generate and supply gas. So in a real sense, and that is a concern, and I'm sure the opposition leader will elucidate on this some more in her presentation, that whereas there's a lot of goodies you're hearing the decrease, but when you look on the revenue side, the shortfall that is predicted more than likely will be way more. So they're saying they estimate to collect $56 billion in revenue, but when you look at their taxation measures, when you are putting over $1 billion to be received from measures such as increasing behavior such as driving under the influence and etc., it means that you are really struggling to generate real revenue. And if we can't generate real revenue, we will be in trouble to even finance this allocation that Tobago is getting. And that's why I'm concerned, and that is why Tobagonians have to watch this with cocky eye. Because if we are not able to finance this allocation, it means that people who are already showing themselves to be bad managers will be even worse, and it could lead to one, the complete shutdown of European CPEP, people not being paid on time. Of course, we already have the challenges of people not receiving gratuities, etc. And finally, those who are on contract, we can see more contract workers being terminated. Tobago could never get too much money. We could always get more. And therefore, I'm saying in a situation where we were guaranteed 6.8%, 5% is no gift. We welcome it. We are happy for it. And I hope that Tobagonians will make a wise choice in who should manage it, because we can do the comparison. We have seen how the PNM have utilized less allocation to the benefit of more Tobagonians, and how this current TPP administration, led by Chief Secretary Augustine, has managed more allocation to giving Tobagonians less benefits. So you have the PNM who have done more with less, and the TPP who is giving away Tobago's patrimony while receiving more.
In terms of the NIS,
That's another.
are we looking towards employment becoming more expensive as an employer? You were looking towards the downgrading in terms of what our employment status here, what our unemployment numbers can increase, as well as the entrepreneurs couldn't be going out of business. What would you say about that, that broadcast or projection from persons who are looking at their
That's a very interesting phenomena that you raised there, because we already have a challenge in Tobago with respect to our private sector. It's very small. And we know that when NIS increase, it is a burden on both the employee, but an even bigger burden on the employer. And therefore, if you're an employer with a small business where you're already struggling, because if you walk the length and breadth of Tobago, I've had conversations with persons in the entertainment sector who sell spirits, etc. I've had conversation with restaurateurs, shopkeepers, etc. And the cries are but the same. Things are slow, it is hard, it is difficult. And in a situation where you already have that kind of environment, to now have to pay additional sums for employees, some persons may see it easier to relieve these persons. So you might end up, especially in the Tobago situation, with a situation where more people are losing jobs, especially in the private sector, because of this increase that they just cannot pay. And therefore, they would, rather than break the law and not pay the NIS, they would prefer to probably just relieve the employee. And so, whereas in one sense they are saying Tobago wins, but our Tobago employees will actually be losing. Well, the record of the PNM is clear. The PNM is the only political party that would go on record that supported 6.8% for Tobago, Tobago getting lawmaking powers, Tobago being able to share in additional revenues from the Fiscal Review Commission, Tobago being able to borrow without the Minister of Finance having to withhold that or say no or give that a kind of approval. It was the PNM who recorded its 22 votes at the time in support of Tobago's autonomy. And the record is it was the UNC and the Chief Secretary who voted against that. So anybody who have making up to do to the Tobagonians, it is the UNC and the Chief Secretary. And quite curiously, while the Prime Minister is saying that off the record, on the official record of this budget, there was not one word, line, hook, sinker about Tobago's autonomy. That word was not used at all, at all, at all. And therefore, I believe I'm someone who, as I said, the devil is in the details. And when it comes to the autonomy conversation, there was absolute silence. So it has been a long afternoon, morning into afternoon. I want to thank you, the members of the media, for your questions and for your presence. I want to thank you, fellow Tobagonians, for taking the time to view, to listen, to comment. And I hope that you, fellow Tobagonians, whether you support the PNM or don't support the PNM, are a bit more informed with the details coming out of this press conference than you were before, because ultimately, as we continue to say in the minority, what is good for Tobago, we will support, and what does not suit you, the people of Tobago's interests, our voice will be there as a strong voice of advocacy, and therefore this is what we are doing today, advocating, appreciating.